Back in the 1860s, the United States was a young, distant country, not yet a global power. So when it erupted into a brutal civil war, why did all of Europe suddenly sit up and pay attention? From London to Berlin, military observers packed their bags and crossed the Atlantic to watch America tear itself apart. But here rests the real question. Did these powerful European empires actually learn anything from America as first industrialized war? Or did they just watch the carnage, take a few notes, and then promptly forget everything when it mattered most? The answer reveals a fascinating and ultimately tragic story about how easy it is to see the future of warfare and still completely ignore it. So, why was Europe so obsessed with a conflict happening thousands of miles away? First, it was a golden opportunity for free military education. Observing someone else's war meant you could study new tactics, strategies, and technologies without spilling a single drop of your own country's blood. It was like getting a front row seat to the world's most dangerous laboratory. Second, the American Civil War was a terrifying glimpse into the future. The industrial might of the Union, with its factories churning out weapons and its railroads moving troops and supplies at an unprecedented scale, showed what war would look like when powered by industry. This was a radical departure from the cavalry charges and musket lines of old Europe. Third, there was a deep curiosity about democratic armies. Could a force made up of volunteer shopkeepers, farmers, and clerks actually stand up to the rigors of a real, prolonged war? European armies were rigid, hierarchical, and built on generations of aristocratic tradition. The American experiment was a wild card, and military leaders were eager to see if it would succeed or collapse. And finally, the timing was perfect. Europe had just come out of major conflicts like the Crimean War and the wars for Italian unification. Militaries across the continent knew that technology was changing the game, but they weren't sure how. The American Civil War seemed to hold the answers. And so, they came. The observers weren't just casual tourists. They were high-ranking military professionals sent on official missions. Prussia, the rising power that would soon unite Germany, was particularly keen. They sent several officers, including the famous Justus Schubert, who embedded himself with the Confederate Army under Robert E. Lee. Schubert was deeply impressed by the skill and audacity of Confederate leadership. Britain, with its vast empire and interests in North America, watched nervously. Officers like Arthur Fremantle traveled extensively throughout the South, documenting everything from battlefield tactics to the social customs of the Confederacy. His diary became a bestseller back home. France, under Napoleon III, also sent observers, as did Russia, the Ottoman Empire, and Austria. They all wanted to peek into America's playbook. Some took meticulous notes, sketching diagrams of fortifications and new types of artillery. Others, unfortunately, filed their reports away in dusty archives, never to be seen again. So what did they see? What lessons were on display? The most obvious was the sheer power of industrial logistics. This wasn't just about battles. It was about the ability to mobilize, equip, and sustain massive armies over vast distances. They saw the devastating effectiveness of new weapons like rifled muskets and repeating carbines, which made traditional infantry charges suicidal. They witnessed the birth of naval warfare with ironclad ships battling on the Mississippi River. And they saw how railroads weren't just for commerce anymore, they were the arteries of modern war, supplying everything from bullets to bread. But the lessons went beyond technology. The observers were struck by the flexible and adaptive nature of American soldiers. These weren't mindless cogs in a military machine. They were volunteers who learned to fight in dense forests and rugged terrain, places where neat European formations were useless. They saw something even more revolutionary: bottom-up thinking. American soldiers and junior officers were often empowered to make tactical decisions on the fly, adapting to the chaos of the battlefield. This was unheard of in the top-down, rigid command structures of European armies, where a lieutenant would never dare question a general's orders. They were witnessing the birth of the modern, thinking soldier. Despite these incredible lessons laid bare, there was a huge gap between observation and understanding. Many of the lessons simply didn't stick, for a few key reasons. First, the geography was completely different. America was a vast, wild continent. The dense woods of Virginia or the swamps of Louisiana were nothing like the open fields of France or Germany, where European armies expected to fight decisive battles. Many observers dismissed the trench warfare and skirmishing they saw as a messy, uniquely American affair, not applicable to a proper European war. There was also a powerful cultural bias at play. European military elites, who were often aristocrats, looked down on the American volunteer armies. They saw them as undisciplined, poorly dressed mobs, not professional soldiers. Even when these mobs proved incredibly resilient and effective, the observers often credited it to luck or brute force, not skill or innovation. They could unwrap their heads around the idea that an army of common citizens could be a model for their own. And finally, for many nations, there was simply no follow-through. Austrian and Ottoman observers sent back detailed reports, but their high commands were too resistant to change. They were comfortable with their old doctrines, their colorful uniforms, and their parade ground drills. The idea of fundamentally changing their entire military philosophy based on what a bunch of rebellious colonists were doing was just too radical. In the years following the Civil War, Europe seemed to actively choose to forget its lessons. A series of short, sharp conflicts, particularly the wars of German unification, led by Prussia, seemed to prove the old ways still worked. The Prussians crushed Denmark, Austria, and France in a matter of weeks or months. These victories reinforced the European belief in the decisive battle. The idea that wars could be won quickly with superior strategy and discipline, not dragged out into long, grinding slogs like the American War. The memory of the 4-year bloodbath at Gettysburg and Antietam faded, replaced by the swift triumphs at Sedan and Sedan. The lesson Europe took was, be more like Prussia, not America. Then came 1914. Suddenly, all of Europe was plunged into the very nightmare it had ignored. World War I was the American Civil War on a monstrous, continental scale. It was a war of trenches, machine guns, mass-produced artillery, and staggering casualties. It was a total war where entire national economies were mobilized for the fight, just as the Unions had been. Only then, as millions died in the mud of the Western Front, did military thinkers look back and realize that the Americans had shown them the future half a century earlier. Some small reforms had happened, one British observer's report, for instance, led to the founding of Canada's Royal Military College. But for the most part, the critical lessons were learned far too late, at an unimaginable cost. So, what's the ultimate takeaway from this story? The U.S. Civil War was a chilling prophecy of modern, industrialized warfare. It showed that victory would depend on factories as much as generals, and on the resilience of citizen soldiers, as much as battlefield brilliance. But Europe's great powers, blinded by their own traditions and biases, failed to adapt. They saw the future, but refused to believe it. It proves a timeless lesson. Having the right information isn't enough. Observation is useless without the courage and humility to change. The most valuable insights can come from the most unexpected places, and dismissing them because they don't fit our worldview can lead to catastrophe. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more dives into forgotten history.